Hello sweetie, you're in a new place now, so I got you a small housewarming gift to help you get things going. Love, Virabelle.
Yeah, I was worried.
P.S. If you hate it, you owe me a fucking castle.
Wait, what?
RC Revenge Pro, another racing game that takes a real-world toy concept and tries its best to apply it to a video game. So that now makes Chorikyu, Scalextric and remote control cars. I'd never actually heard of this game before, that is, until my girlfriend Virabelle brought it to my attention saying she played it a lot when she was younger. So naturally, I was curious and she's now given it to me since there's a sort of niche that's formed in my channel, which is that I cover odd and random racing games. Now that isn't all I do, but I can't deny it is a pretty interesting topic. I do have a lot I want to say about this game, but first, let's give a quick rundown as to what sort of racing game we're dealing with here. RC Revenge Pro feels more like a Mario Kart style racer than anything else. It sort of reminds me of Groove Rider, probably just due to the toy aesthetic. Groove Rider being another game I've covered on this channel. Be sure to give it a look, won't you? RC Revenge Pro doesn't go in quite as hard with its toy theme though. Honestly, it just has RC cars but in very non-toy themed tracks. It's got items or power-ups which you can pick up by driving through mystery boxes littered throughout the tracks, very much Mario Kart inspired. It's your standard assortment of items, things like homing rockets, speed boosts, shields, slippery puddle things, etc, etc. Pretty typical. We're going to drift back around talking about the items in just a bit because I got some tea to spill. So like most car racers, you're given an assortment of vehicles to choose from, all with their own stats with varying vehicle styles. They can either move faster, be easier to handle, or accelerate quicker. Or so they would have you think. Upon noticing the differences in vehicles, I couldn't help but wonder which one was actually the fastest out of the initial roster of vehicles, so I conducted a scientific experiment, using science. I used a handy-dandy feature in the game, the track editor. Firstly, yeah, this game has a fully fledged track editor where you can create all kinds of different tracks. It's a pretty neat feature honestly, so I made a simple track which would let me drive straight with all the vehicles so I could reach my max speed. Then I'd record the results and my conclusion: this game is a liar. The menu would have you believe that the F1 racer is the fastest vehicle since the speed stat is pretty maxed out, not to mention it's a pretty natural reaction to assume the F1 racer would be pretty damn fast. But this is not the case. In fact, I'd argue the F1 racer is one of the worst vehicles in the game since, while it is reasonably fast, the handling is awful. It's slippery as hell and you just crash and slide all over the place. The fastest vehicle I found from the initial roster was the Beach Buggy, as its max speed when driving flat out on a straight road was actually 1 unit faster than the F1 racer, and on top of this has much better handling, being able to execute tighter turns all the while going faster. Not that it matters though, the stats only apply to you. The computer controlled racers, they're goddamn hustlers. They're not quite as bad as in penny racers since, if you remember, in that game there would always be one racer which when it was on its final lap would hit the nitro and drive way faster. At least here they're always going bullshit fast so you know to expect it. Thing is, kart racers having aggressive AI is nothing new. However, there is a difference between an AI being more competitive and just being flat out broken. For example, take a pretty standard kart racer like Mario Kart 64. Other racers can often tear ahead, especially on the higher difficulty settings, but now, let me ask you this. What can you do to pull ahead in Mario Kart? Mario Kart always has little tricks you can use to pull ahead. The drift boosts can be helpful, especially in the later games, but the biggest one you should all be screaming at me is items. Now I know you might not have been thinking that because it's such a stupidly simple answer, right? But the items in Mario Kart were a pretty important tool when it came to pulling ahead. Mario Kart has plenty of great items throughout its series, and what's better is that they scale depending on your placement. You'll get the rarer and more powerful items if you're falling behind, and they can be game changing, bringing you from last place all the way to first if used correctly. But hold the fuck up, Yuusha, you pasty white boy. You already said there's items in this game, and trust me, I know. I didn't have a stroke midway. They're just crap is all, so give me a sec. So I was originally going to actually spill tea as part of the joke, but now that I have it here, I'm like, I don't want to do that because it's nice. I'm British, where I come from, it's like a crime to waste tea, so instead, let's just talk about the items. Yep, the items in this game are pretty much useless, so how about we take a little look at them and you can see what we're dealing with. Before we go into this, we'll use Mario Kart items as our baseline of comparison, so firstly, the rocket. You can consider this the red shell. It's a rocket which is meant to home in on other racers and knock them off course, inconveniencing them temporarily, which it does, but The rocket has terrible homing. If it doesn't hit a wall, it blows up by hitting the ground because for some reason the tracks in this game are bumpy as hell. When driving you get knocked all over the place and can barely get traction due to there being so many little bumps and hills on the track. You'd think with this being such a prominent part of the levels, they would have incorporated the ground in the programming of the rocket. You wouldn't see that in Mario Kart. Even in Mario Kart 64, the very first 3D one, the red shells home in on other racers incredibly well. Sure, they sometimes hit walls and tight corners, but it traverses the ground with no issues at all. It certainly doesn't just stop from hitting the damn bump on the ground. Besides, anytime I've used a rocket and it hit, it didn't really seem to be more than a minor inconvenience for the other racers since, before long, they're neck and neck with me again, or firing on ahead. This is also the case for other one-hit items. There's this big area of effect explosion item meant to hit all the racers around you, and I'm not sure if it's just me thinking this, but it sure as hell seems to slow me down when I get hit by it much more than any of the other racers. If they get hit by it, it barely seems to slow them down at all. Now I do want to focus on RC Revenge itself, since I can sometimes focus on comparing things to other games a bit too hard. Let's see what kind of unique things RC Revenge Pro screws up all on its own. One of the other items you find in this game is this sort of electricity attack that actually does slow down other racers, but again, not for long. It's probably one of the more useful items in the game though. That isn't saying a whole lot, but it does come with its own share of problems. The way it works is the more you attack another racer with it, the more it slows them down. Sounds good in theory, right? Then you get hilarious situations cropping up where I have this item, someone else has this item, we're both using it at the same time on each other, so what happens? We both get slowed down to the point where we're practically not moving and it's officially more of a hindrance than a help. Admittedly, this is an unlikely scenario to occur, but still, just felt a bit silly to me. Besides janky stuff like that, a big issue I have with a lot of the offensive items is how much they require you to aim, but not just in front of you like say a green shell, but actually arc a throw. There's this bubble item you throw and if it hits a racer it traps them in a bubble for a few seconds. Pretty decent way to inconvenience a player and it actually works fairly well, provided you can actually get a hit in, that is. Because like I said, it expects you to do advanced mathematical equations to figure out the precise trajectory and landing point of this bubble to hit a distant enemy. All the while, you're moving, they're moving, there's no visual aid to help with the aiming, and you're bumping all over the place just trying to drive straight on the bumpiest road I've ever seen. RC Revenge Pro, more like RC Revenge No. Yeah. I mean, the game isn't terrible, it just feels incredibly unbalanced. It's definitely hard, which wouldn't be an issue if your methods to catch up weren't totally useless. The items simply aren't effective enough, so you can be stuck in 5th place with no real way to catch up. It's honestly rare to place in the top 3. Even when I was fully focused and giving it my all, I still struggled to get a good placement. I averaged around 4th place and sometimes it could be as bad as 7th. I know, you suck. But seriously, you must agree with me that the point of having items in a game like this is that they should help with the balance. If you get an item, it should feel significant, it should at least help you go up 1 extra place, but they somehow just don't, and like I said, this game has some bumpy tracks, so using half of them becomes a ridiculous proposition since you either need precise aim, or whatever you shoot will just hit a bump and veer off in the complete opposite direction, or back into yourself. Bumpiness aside, the tracks in this game are actually fairly interesting. Usually big winding levels with a specific theme in mind, and many with crazy set pieces like this giant octopus you see on a water race with its tentacles flailing all over the place. It's huge, dangerous, and pretty awesome, and in the same level, you encounter a creature which looks very similar to that one which came out with the Black Lagoon in that one movie. Cool set piece and neat reference. Sadly, not all tracks are super interesting, but I'll give the game credit where it's due. It has some really interesting tracks which would be awesome if not for how, as I mentioned, goddamn bumpy and unruly a lot of the paths in the tracks are, and I mean needlessly bumpy. It just makes any of the tracks frustrating, especially since you can even end up flipping your car onto its roof, which requires you to then hit the respawn button, all of which takes up a lot of time to actually work, and it sucks, because it's just rubbing salt on the wound and ends up wasting your time. Maybe they were just really proud of the way the physics worked in this game and just had to include it, because it sure as hell doesn't add anything to the experience. RC Revenge Pro was not a good time, and that's unfortunate because you'd think the idea would be great. If anything, they didn't go far enough with how inherently cartoony and silly they could push the concept. I guess you could say, I don't like it. And I need to go look for a castle to buy.